to the website. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to get this launched. If you could pull up the slides, that would be beautiful. Beth is asking, did I miss a charter school meeting prior to this? So good question, Beth. There was a meeting earlier from 1 to 3 for superintendents and charter schools, just kind of an RSSL update. All right, looks like Alex, there we go. There we go, we're getting these started. Also, just a quick note that Scott is joining via phone. So we'll have his beautiful voice, but not his wonderful face. So thank you, Scott, for being here today. Since Shandine and I were talking, you hold all of these metrics details deeply in your bones. So it's very helpful. So just a reminder that Ready Schools Safe Learners is really connected to these 3 pieces of important guidance, and that's what we're here to unpack and sense make today. And your questions are and input are always welcome. Next slide, Alex. Thank you. So office hours are designed for us to come together and provide clarity around the guidance as you implement and launch your school year. Now that it's October, most of you are beyond the launch. Some of our colleagues and places affected by fire, of course, not yet launched. So we know everybody's in their own place there. We want to create a space where your questions and ideas inspire new thinking and help you with your planning. And we also want to make sure that there's a 2-way opportunity for communication as we work together. Next slide, please. So today we'll have Scott, myself, and Shandine helping to facilitate. And unfortunately, Ashley is not able to be here today, but Alex is here, which is really wonderful. And thank you for that. And I also believe Alexa Pearson, our teaching and learning director, is with us. So just a reminder, you can use the chat for questions. We'll do our best to respond. And just to be real sensitive to, if you're in a really unique school or setting, holding space for your questions so that we make sure to meet the needs of as many people on the call as possible. And just a reminder that these are recorded and you can watch them again if you want to listen again to any information that you need to go back and retrieve and or think about a second time. And you can also share them with other colleagues at your district that might not have been able to attend. This is where you can find the office hours are linked to the RSL site. Right there, you can see the red circle. At the very bottom, it'll say RSSL office hours. You click there and you'll find the recordings. And today, just a couple, again, I know this is, it feels redundant for those of you who already know this, but we have some friends that are new on the call. So office hours are Monday from 3 to 4. They are recorded and available on our website, and an encouragement to use COVID-19 inbox for any questions that you have throughout the week and or that don't get addressed in today's time together. And also, and Alex, you may have already supported folks with this, but if you could please make sure to change your participant identification and include your first and last name, that would be really helpful for us, just so we know who's joining us and we can be more responsive in our follow-up. So Scott had a great idea. We thought about how do we want to use our hour today, and he suggested a Q storm, a questioning storm, which is an effort to really, if I understand it well, having never facilitated a Q storm. So Scott, chime in if I don't have this right. Essentially an opportunity for us to surface the biggest questions that are brewing for you right now in your role in schools and districts. And so we're gonna see a lot of activity in the chat, and then we'll have a chance to kind of look through, and instead of addressing them one by one, we'll look for through themes or trends to kind of pull out as a way to guide our time together today. So give you an opportunity, just kind of take a deep breath. I know there's a lot going on. We're moving at quick pace, and really reflect what's a critical question that you would like some time to think out loud about, hear us respond to, and put into the space today. And you can go ahead and use the chat to frame your question. While you're doing that, I also just wanted to put out there, we have been hearing a lot about different reported rumors or thoughts that there might be some kind of big announcement today. So we just wanted to let people know, no big announcement today, and just appreciation for people holding a healthy dose of skepticism for things that are carried your way via social media. So appreciation for those of you who reached out just to double check that information. And thank you to Greg and to Meryl and for putting in some questions. We'll give a couple more minutes.
Shondine or Jennifer, just to play along, as other people are brainstorming, like what are questions that we spend so much time with, like technical guidance, which we're not trying to avoid if folks have technical guidance questions, but what are brainstorms you have about questions about the next couple months ahead?
Scott, also quick question, do you have chat access?
I don't. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I was just wondering if you were on chat. All good.
Yeah, no, just audio, which is limiting, except that I get to take it in through your interpretation of what's in the chat. So.
Yeah, some of these are really great questions, especially in the context of what we're currently processing with the complaints. So I'm trying to think about how we might be able to cluster these questions. So give me a second. Okay, let's go with one cluster being around things that have been waived, like requirements, and for what groups in high school in particular. That's one cluster. Mm-hmm. Let's go with another one on the tension between essentially how are we responding to the wave of families who are pushing to get schools open regardless of the current metrics, and loop into that conversation private school requirements as well, and what that looks like both in the complaint process and what that looks like for the support that we're offering schools. And then a whole section on, I would say a little bit on lots of metrics questions.
Also, Shondine, looks like a theme around attendance, both student and staff.
Agree. So let's start with the first one. Let's start with the first bucket. Did you capture that, Jennifer? On
I did. So here's what I've heard. Here's what I heard you name, Shondine. First bucket is like what's been waived. Second bucket is how are we responding to mounting pressure to open schools, and then within that focusing on around questions around private schools, and then the third being attendance for both students and staff.
Yeah, let's start there, and then we'll capture some of the others that are coming in too.
Beautiful. That sounds great. All right, well, what's been waived? I'll first put this to rest. There seems to be a rumor that essential skills for this year's juniors have been waived. So that is not the case. Essential skills requirements for this year's seniors have been waived. And I apologize, that's my dog, my goodness. There it is in the RSSL guidance on page 67, I believe. Let me check really quick, but there is, you're welcome to take a look. It's in 5G. I'll put the requirement here so you can see it. There we go. There's the requirement. It's on page 71 in RSSL.
And Jennifer, somebody asked in the chat about early grads. If the student already had an early graduation plan, they would count as a senior. So they would, the essential, I mean, they would be already on that early grad path. They would not, the essential skills waive would count for them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alexa. That's a great clarification. So Shantine, maybe helpful too in terms of this bigger theme of what's been waived. The Oregon assessment at the end of the year that we all take, some of which you call the SBAC, so the summative Oregon assessment, has not been waived. So it is still required, and that is a federal requirement. There are 3 states that have gone forward with their waiver requests. Those have all 3 been denied. So at this point, the federal government is being very clear and naming that they are not approving waiver requests for the summative assessment. So that is where we currently sit. Also worthy to note, we have made this year's summative assessment quite a bit smaller. We've removed the performance task portion, and big credit to our director, Dan Farley, and his team for that win. So the test, as it stands now, if we were to give it tomorrow, is quite a bit shorter than in years past because the performance task has been eliminated. But it is still required, and we have not yet figured out administrative details, but we will be working on that.
On those administrative details, because it wrapped up a little bit into assessment, is the SAT, ACT, PSAT. So part of the administrative details are how are we going to actually create the space for students to be assessed. And so I would say to the question that was asked about that you already have one scheduled, should I go ahead and cancel the PSAT? If it's possible to delay it, I would delay it. If it's like absolutely impossible, let's see if we can't get a huddle together to figure something out. Our goal, our hope is to really we've got a draft in front of us right now on that SAT guidance, just full transparency. Next step is it goes to OHA for them to crosswalk it and make sure that they approve and it meets all the safety requirements. And then we want to have it go through a communications review so then we can get it out to folks. So there are multiple steps in it. And I know it's important, especially for juniors and seniors who are applying to colleges and they need their SATs right now. And so, Star, I know you asked the question, so if you want to reach out, but if it's possible to delay it, I would delay it.
Shantine, do you have a guess at an expected date on that? Just so schools know how far out to communicate delays?
I appreciate the question. My sister is on me like you wouldn't believe on this one because she also helps administer the SAT here in Eugene. So in a perfect world, we're going to be able to look at that draft, get it in front of OHA on either our Tuesday or our Thursday meeting. And then a team of us will work through the weekend to get it like as tight as we can and get it to communications. And so in a perfect world, I want it in under a week and a half. In terms of communicating out, I would think it'd be reasonable to schedule makeups, if you will, or delay for November to give your team time to read the assessment, understand what requirements are needed in order to get what you need to make it successful. So I would think November dates would be reasonable.
Shantine, I'm just reading Lance's, and thank you, Lance, for putting in here. I don't know, Lance, where that's quoted from. So if you could help us, is that from the TAM that was just published?
Yeah, that email just came out today, and it says it comes from page 7 of the Summative Test Administration Manual.
Thank you. So I've got our Director of Assessment, Dan Farley, here, and he's naming that that was an error in their publication. So we will be working to issue an update and correction ASAP and apologizing for that mistake. And thank you for that clarification. I knew there was got to be some source of it because it's come up a few times today. So apologies that we confused you, and clarification, essential skills are only waived for current seniors. All right, Shandine, I think we're probably ready to transition out of the what's been waived bucket, and let's move into the how are you responding to pressure, mounting pressure to open schools? That's a great question. We know we're all feeling it. You know, these two dueling tensions of getting our children in school and also mitigating COVID spread, and lots of intense emotions and positions around both of those conversations. And we're in the middle of it with you around that, that tension point. So go ahead, Shandine.
Yeah, Jennifer, let's bucket the questions all together on the metrics. With that, I'm going to read them out loud so Scott can hear them. And then let's actually, Scott, you and I engage on how we're responding. So question 1, can you talk a little bit about how some private schools are able to be in person, referring to the recent information about the 2 parochial schools in the Portland area? 2, how is ODE responding to the wave of families pushing to get schools opened regardless of metrics? 3, is there any movement towards changing the metrics for including grades 4 and 5 to the K-3 exception? Give me a second, and I'm scanning super quickly in other metrics. We are a CDL with a K-3 exception for on-site learning. Does the metrics of 30 per 100,000 2 weeks in a row shut us down for on-site learning for K-3? Let's start there, and I'll start scooping some more metric questions to my group.
Thanks for reading to me. Yeah. So hi everybody. Apologies to just be on my phone. I'll try to track through, Shandine, and then help me focus on what I missed. I think, first of all, like, you know, there could be space here where you could all share with each other how you're dealing with increased pressure. So in the broad outline of that, I will say that's absolutely true. And that makes sense for a couple reasons. 1, we're farther into the beginning of the year. 2, the first wave of any kinds of challenge or engagement with online learning, you know, you're hitting a, like anything that you do that's new or challenging, you know, you're hitting a point where that's getting hard. We all want to be in person, and there's not a person I've met that doesn't think that that's a better way, which we should all remember for later on down the road, how much we think that being in person matters. You know, it's complicated. We have to be super humble about COVID. We're still learning a lot. There's really only a couple of substantial studies. The most recent one from India suggests that younger children can effectively spread the virus, which contradicts the South Korean study. We don't know how much or to what extent. There's a lot of new studies. I'm not here talking politically about what's happened with the president, but there's a lot of new studies and research about the way the virus spreads and the potential that certain folks can spread it quite a bit more than other people, and what that means. And it's very clear that indoor spaces are places of higher risk. So there's a lot of humility we need to have. It's still very early in the fall as we head into flu season, and trying to make sense of how this is all going to kind of play out. And obviously there's a lot of pressure and feelings, strong feelings on both sides. So the one thing I'll say at a high level is just we're trying to, how do we stay steady, be respectful, try to keep different parts of the system talking to each other, trying to build more community rather than less. There's so many ways for us to be fractured. And, you know, what can build relationship or trust or communication, even if it's nuanced or complicated. And at the same time, trying to be consistent at the state level in terms of a framework that no one would think is perfect, but is the best we can come up with. and then try not to keep kind of changing too many structures on the fly. So that's broadly where we're at. And then there's a systematic review happening with the Oregon Health Authority, the state of Washington, that will include the governor's office and ODE through the month of October to basically ask some substantial questions about what do we know about the science, what do we know based on the numbers, and what's unfolded across the state. I have not heard any active conversation about changing the K-3 metric to include grades 4, 5, and 6. I have heard conversations, that are very early about ways to think about these threshold parameters of coming in and coming out. We're pretty consistent with CDC guidance, but the buffers of when folks come out of exceptions could possibly get adjustment, but we're talking, month or two down the road, if at all. It's really a rigorous process to try to sort through that as best we can. On the, let me pause there. Shondine, anything at kind of a high level you'd add, and then I'll get into the specifics of some of the other questions.
I think where I would add high level, I think you're going to do on specifics. So let me hear where you pivot, and then I would like to sort of talk about what the TA is like in real time.
Okay. So first, just to clear up on the K-3 exception. So once a school who's in CDL and is using the K-3 exception, Colt put out a memo week prior, and maybe one of my colleagues can put the language in the chat that covers what has been a confusion for a while around, so when do you have to come out of that K-3 exception? It is different when you're using a CDL exception than when you're fully under the metrics to be fully in person. So when you're fully in person, that happens when you're under that case rate of 10 per 100,000. The state positivity rate remains suspended for this week, but comes back next week. But when you meet those, then when you get up above 30 per 100,000, that's the transition out of a fully in-person or hybrid model. But when you're looking at just the K-3 exception, it's not an automatic move based on the metrics being up for 2 weeks. The language is really specific around consultation with your local public health authority, and specifically if you have 2 cases in cohorts with an unexplained common exposure, then we're really wanting folks to come out of that K-3 exception. But we're trying to allow for a lot of nuance, and hopefully that makes sense to folks, because we have some very big counties, and you're in one school community, and you could see your case rate go up, but those that have almost no spread or change in your community, we're trying to offer that nuanced wrinkle for the K-3 for now. So that's how that one works. Shondine, any more you'd add to that one?
No, that's perfect. And folks are saying that makes sense. And I went ahead and linked that message from the 9/24 email that went to everybody.
Perfect. On what we do when we are aware of a concern or a complaint about the metrics, whether it's from health and safety protocol, mask wearing, whether it's about not following metrics on opening, we engage in a TA process. Our first move is to reach out and have our kind of senior staff have conversations with folks around trying to understand the nature of the complaint, if there's any grounding to it, if we can find ways to resolve it, practicing the kind of resolve at the lowest levels you can first. If we can't reach resolution in those processes, then we move forward in an enforcement process that can include OSHA and or OHA, depending on the nature of the concern and how much of a health and safety issue it is. And then we move that through a process. To give you some data, Shondine, you can tell me, but we've received definitely more than 100 formal complaints. At this point, we have 5 going through that formal enforcement process. And Shondine, remind me some of the other specific questions.
That the 4 of the 5, to my knowledge, are all private schools. And so I'm not sure about the 5th because that's new knowledge to me, but that's a technical response and an important one, so you know the process. The in real time, what that technical assistance looks like when you're on the phone with schools, even some who are very much out of compliance, is some really just want to be heard about the struggle, what's happening. They realize that we're serious and that we're going to follow up and that we're going to double check and talk to people. folks, like I've seen some pretty beautiful responses of leaders saying, okay, all right, I'm going to get better. I'm going to work harder. Here's what we need to do. We need to be in compliance. We're hearing it. Can you help support us in that? We don't have enough masks, or we need a little bit. Yes, here's how we can get masks to you. Yes, here's how, let me put us on some calls to talk with some of your school leaders. Let's talk and help with us. And so there's that element of the TA, just wanting to be heard, wanting to brainstorm potential solutions where they're out of compliance, and struggling a bit with some of what you've raised on the call, the reality of, for example, staff absences, the reality of folks who are potentially higher risk, and what does that look like? And so a lot of the TA has been problem solving with folks who are struggling a little bit.
I feel like I missed a question specific to the Archdiocese. Do you remind me of that one?
Yeah, one is, can you talk a little bit about why/how some private schools are able to be in person, referring to the recent information about 2 parochial schools in the Portland area?
I would need more information about that. It's the first that I'm aware of it. I would like more information about it. It would require, some more detail and explanation. We've had a few situations where schools, whether private schools or public schools, are using the limited in-person in completely legit but creative ways, where they're bringing, half of students in the morning, half the students in the afternoon, a lot of activity, buses, cleaning between uses and playgrounds and buses, but to other people's perspective, it looks like they're operating school. So, but I don't know that specific to the question in the Portland area. But if someone else has more information, we definitely would want to find out about that. I'm not aware of that as a thing that would have any way to comport with the metrics as I understand them. But we'd need to learn more.
I asked that question, and I'm happy to find the article that I just read. It was from KGW, and I'll find that and I'll see if I can link it, and if not, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Scott, I'm Amy Jeffries, Associate Superintendent for the Archdiocese of Portland, and that Channel 8 article was regarding one of our schools, Cathedral Downtown, I think is the one that is being referred to. And she's open under an emergency childcare license and doing limited in-person instruction. I can't speak to the other Christian school that was in there. They're not part of our system.
Yeah, thank you. And that kind of gets to the kind of confusion I think that can happen, which is and all the rest you can imagine, and it's not just private schools, it's public schools as well. If you're using the child care process and you're doing limited in-person instruction, to other people's eyes, it might look like you're operating school. We know that's confusing and complicated, but it is following the guidance across the state sectors. So thanks for the clarification.
With that question, let's push a little bit on Kathy's question to make sure it was answered. And that was, can students at emergency childcare take part in limited in-person instruction? That would require them to be in both the child care cohort and the limited group.
Yeah, so they can. Actually, the state's expectation is a little bit the flip of that. If you are going to offer child care, the expectation is that you are offering limited in-person instruction in some capacity. One of my colleagues will put the link into the comprehensive distance learning, limited in-person instruction, kind of supplemental guidance. It does lay out in detail what qualifies for limited in-person instruction, this relationship to care, and it also names the total facility limit of 250 students in the facility. That's the important parameter to pay attention to in terms of total health and safety, and that was an OHA created parameter, so I encourage folks to give that a close review. But otherwise, the answer is yes, you could have students who are both in the participating in care and in the limited in-person instruction.
It feels like we have most of the metrics questions answered, and now we've got just a few sort of popcorn questions, which I can just go ahead and just start saying them out loud. And then Scott, Jennifer, Alexa, Dan. Go ahead, Jennifer, you want to say something?
Yeah, just the third bucket we'd talked about initially was attendance. So we haven't talked about that third bucket. So should we go there first?
Yeah, let's go with Angie's at 311. In compliance with Horman's law on parent notification while following a 24-hour school day for engagement attendance. Wait a minute.
Yeah,
That's
I
not a
wasn't
question.
sure
Help
what
me,
your
Angie.
question was. Angie, could you unmute and let us know where your question lives within that?
Sure, absolutely. It's just coming up in several different venues. So, you know, with Horman's Law, you have to notify within the school day that a student's absent. But with engagement and trying to give space and flexibility for success, we're saying, okay, we have a 24-hour school day or maybe even over the weekend. So districts are kind of like, well, when would our auto dialer, you know, it's kind of that, just the logistics of notification during the school day when it's asynchronous, and feeling like they have this accountability to follow this law, and yet it doesn't make sense in our current context. So I was just curious about any guidance you guys might have on that.
I can take that one unless you want it, Jennifer. There's a really recent, and I know we're just so much information, relatively recent FAQ on attendance and ADM, average daily membership. It got put out, and again, hopefully someone can grab that and put in the chat. But we speak specifically to this issue, share some ideas about ways people are doing it. We've documented and named that you can basically set your 24-hour window and navigate in some pretty creative fashions. Lots of districts and systems have figured out how to do this in a way that we believe both fits with the law's intent and with the current situation. And then in addition to that guidance, which speaks, you know, gives a lot of concrete detail about timing and hours and how to do it and a recommendation, we're also going to work up a kind of tip sheet or best practices. We've heard a concern from teachers and from districts feeling like the attendance tracking of engagements taking up an inordinate amount of time. We think other schools and educators have found good solutions to this that aren't as burdensome. We're going to try to elevate those for everyone to track to. Now it gets a little tricky. Some districts or schools have chosen more constraining policies or practices, which is their right to do within the guidance framework, but then it becomes kind of at their level to solve. But within the state framework, we think we can address both the needs you're mentioning, Angie, and we're going to try to elevate some examples to give people some concrete ideas.
Thank you.
On that attendance, this is peripheral, but it impacts. And so I want to loop Paul's sort of attendance adjacent question to this, Scott. Will ODE seek support for school districts who have lost enrollment this year due to a huge uptick in homeschooling? This will have a huge impact on next year's budget.
Thanks for that question. We are tracking this as an issue. Essentially, for those who aren't familiar, we use the language of ADM, so average daily membership, and then the state uses a particular form of that where we think about it as an extended ADM, which generally helps with kind of larger ebbs and flows of enrollment. In this year, as we see those enrollments play out, we're aware that they don't create an immediate budget impact, but we are hearing from folks, and helpful if folks want to sound off in the chat about what you're experiencing, somewhere between 7, 10, 12% changes, usually decreases in enrollment. And there is a recognition that if you take that, you compound some budget worries in terms of economic impact, future potential COVID impact, that could have a lot of repercussions for the next biennium's budgeting for schools. There are early conversations happening with Director Gill and Legislative Affairs and legislators kind of tracking this issue and trying to think through any possible solutions or remedies. I can't say that can yet be on the record to saying we're pushing or advocating, as we tend not to hold that kind of position, but more to give advice and information. But it's definitely something that's on the radar.
Shondine, there's also a question in here around substitutes. So just to back to that absence piece, this is something we've heard a lot of questions around. So how do we support staff absences? How are folks utilizing subs to fill gaps when we are in CDL and it requires so much technology? So I just want to honor that question. I don't think it's been solved. We've certainly heard a lot of people solving it and attempting to solve it in different ways. And we certainly know that what we're hearing is that it's a little easier to solve for in elementary because potentially students can join another class. Similarly, you could do that if there was no teacher. You could send, you could send my kids to Shondine's classroom, for example, or distribute them in that way. So we've heard of folks doing that. We've also heard of folks creatively using specialists that are maybe not doing synchronous teaching all day and utilizing them in creative ways. And also asking teachers to create kind of like a tech folder, if you will, so like a plan B, and teaching their students, like, if I'm gone for a day, here you're going to get the plan B folder, and it'll be emailed to you or linked in our Google Classroom, and you'll go through it and do this work asynchronously, and or there'll be some asynchronous videos that I've linked, things like that. So having a plan that the teacher sort of preps the students and the families for, so they know where to go if something is different. So I think there's been the most success solving for one-day absences and a lot of questions that are lingering around long-term substitutes. And I would say in a similar way, kind of the best notion is building capacity and helping link up some long-term subs that are maybe available to you with teachers who are having success in CDL, giving them some tools and some tips so that they are able to serve students in real time, but recognizing and appreciating the question and the challenge.
And some examples of that in real time is, oh, sorry, Jennifer, you were going where I was going. To
Ginger's comment. Yep, go for it.
Exactly. She's saying subs. So we've asked teachers to have 3 days of lessons pre-recorded and substitute plans in their folder, set up temporary passwords for teachers that subs can use. Lots of ideas out there. That's another hope of the these office hours, is that you would then see that Ginger said that and just send her a quick chat and say, gosh, I'd love to see that. I'd love to talk to you more about that if I have questions, or so see each other as thought partners on the call.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ginger, for that. Similarly, just in that same spirit, there's some questions around what do you do if you have families who may send children to school when they knowingly are sick? And we've all probably been there, right? We've had our moments as working parents, or it's like, oh, they really were symptomatic 3 days ago. They're fine. They can go to school or preschool. Oh my goodness. I certainly been there with my preschool student a couple of years ago. But in any case, I think that's another place where it'd be great to hear ideas if anybody has suggestions or ideas around how to address that, of course, with care and love and kindness for the families who are likely, in their like living through their own reality and need for their child to attend school for all the reasons we know so well. So put out ideas if you've got some there. Okay, Shondine, should we start looking for
just one quick thing on that front, Jennifer? I would say messaging. So a couple of things I'll say just as like high level messaging things. So one, I think people don't realize that like when you compress things, people have a hard time with nuance. So they kind of communicate at an absolute value. So if you message something like do this, don't do this, it's very hard for people to take away the headline message. And there's so much information coming at people. And our public health colleagues would tell us like guilt and shame don't work very well to change behavior. Pointing people to what is the preferred behavior is important. But I do want to underscore, and I don't disagree with you, Jennifer, that all families struggle with these balancing acts, but there's never been a time where more is at stake. And you want to try to have families who might otherwise not have a minute catch. And so something as simple as like 5 seconds before you take your kid out to the door, like you know, like a health and safety like mindset, like simple messaging campaigns that can break through for families. And if anybody has examples, please send them to us or put them in the chat. But you're really trying to get families to basically do a double gut check in a way that breaks the thing. And so just very specific behavior that they can routinize that helps people think about it, and staying really focused on what it is you want people to do without tons of detail is the kind of thing that we understand both from the public health literature and messaging wise what might help. But I'd love, you know, folks, we're working at the state level, so if any of you have very specific local versions of what you're trying to do, especially if you're seeing any success, that'd be good. But I don't think want to minimize the risks involved. And we are hearing stories both in Oregon and across the country where families may be sending kids who may have been exposed to COVID. They may not be sick themselves, but are sending them to school where they'd otherwise should be quarantining. So I do think it's an important issue.
Looks like Wendy, to that end, Scott has shared a daily family screen resource. So thanks for that, Wendy. Lance at 313 had a good question around masks, Shondine, that I wanted to highlight because I know, and Scott, maybe you can help jog my memory because I know we had talked about this. There had been some concerns and questions because in our guidance we talk about you may not for any reason not include a student from school for not wearing a mask. And so it sounds like there are some places where there's challenges around how if students not meeting that request and following that and then saying, now what do we do in this situation? So first, Shondine and Scott, are we working on anything around that? Is that sounding familiar to you?
Yeah, well, so we're not actively working on anything to change, although, you know, at some point, if we do some revision, we might find ways to further tighten, but the guidance is clear. The issue that's happening is, I say this respectfully, but essentially folks are, well, the respectful way to say it is they're curating the guidance, and the less respectful way is to say they're cherry picking the guidance. But essentially the guidance has a couple of different messages in section 1H, and all of them matter. And you can't pick and choose. So one message is that face coverings are required. And they're required for students, and they're required for families or adults in common areas. Another message is that for students who can't tolerate a face covering or face shield for reasons of medical necessity, think about issues with lungs or asthma capacity, or reasons of disability, can't be denied instruction for that reason. And problem solving and accommodations need to happen through your special ed directors and with your team. And that's a critical protection. The third thing is that for any other reason where a student because of their family doesn't have a medical necessity or a disability, and they just choose to abstain from wearing masks, can and should be offered education through comprehensive distance learning, but the district is not in a place to have them stay on campus. The guidance does state that this should not be treated as a disciplinary action. It should be treated from a place of communication, development, understanding, trying to reach out to students and the family. But if they can't solve it, the district does have the ability to say that the family or the student can no longer be on campus and will get their education through the delivery of comprehensive distance learning if you've ruled out the other exceptions. That guidance is not unclear about that. Because there's a lot of messages right alongside each other, I think it can get confusing, and we can work better to clear that up for folks. We have had folks reach out for technical assistance to help work through that real situation. We really do want folks to focus on trying to work in good communication with students and families rather than that getting adversarial. But at the end of the day, if a family or a student just refuses to kind of care for the health and safety protocols for other folks and doesn't have the necessity, they should be in CDL.
That's super helpful. Thank you,
Hey,
Scott.
Scott, this is Lance. So I think one of the things that contributes a little bit to this is when you go to the FAQ sheet on ODE's webpage under mask or face coverings, there's a section there that says, do not exclude students from the classroom if they occasionally fail to wear a face covering, or if a few students in the classroom are consistently unable to wear face coverings when required. The small increase in risk of disease transmission does not justify classroom exclusion.
I appreciate that. We should look at that from a place of this is a perfect chance to practice like an equity practice of intent and impact. The intent there is to try. There was concern that we'd move too quickly to exclusion rather than this developmental approach, and work with families to try to explain the need before moving there. And so we were worried about that. But I can see how if you just work off that FAQ and you don't have everything else or the full guidance, you could come away with the wrong understanding. So that point taken, and we can work on some addressing of that.
Right. And my concern, Scott, has just been, and I put that in here, is that ability to have just scheduled breaks during the day, I think is one way to mitigate this impact we're having on students that, cannot continually keep their face mask on. But that's been an upward climb as well with our local associations when it comes to scheduling a break for everyone.
Yeah, I do think that how you schedule that break, so I agree, we know from the OHA folks, and if at some point, if you think it's helpful, we could ask some OHA folks to join one of these calls as an offering around avenues to do like a safe mask break. I think we want to be careful with the ways that can also be kind of abused or misconstrued, but the goal is an important one. We all have, most of us working with kids or have kids, it's a lot to wear a mask half day, all day. And so, but the details are important. So if you're out, the best way to take a mask break is outside with more than 6 feet of social distance. That's the best way to do it. And the second best way, if you're indoors, is to make sure you have that 6 feet of full distance and then masks are off and no one's moving around. Those are hard things to do well, especially with kids. And want to be careful that we're not just, folks are basically, I was a middle school teacher. I understand, kids just take my mask down and say, I'm taking a mask break. And, you got to figure out a way to work through what's a need and what's, basically kind of messing around with people's health and safety. Those are tough lines. That's basically the art of you all running school. So we know that's challenging. But I agree that can be a useful thing to help mitigate and get the right balance.
And that's along the lines of what was just put in the chat, which is there a way for us to clarify what counts as a facial covering? A staff member shared a post from social media of someone selling crochet lace face masks to get around meeting the requirements. And so the guidance is really clear about what it is. That's someone looking for a workaround and loopholes. So the clarity isn't going to address that. That's just proxy for ways to get out of following guidance. And so we can do the best that we can about being clear, and we will work on the other side when we process complaints and talk with leaders about how we deal with those that are just finding other ways to get out of following guidance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I can add that the face covering links to the CDC guidance on face coverings, and the CDC guidance on face coverings is very specific and would rule out that kind of face covering. So for those of you needing an anchor, you can pin back to that CDC face covering guidance.
I'll grab that link and put it in again.
Beth has a question. Is ODE's stance still that a face shield without a mask is okay?
So the guidance through OHA was initially that they were equivalent. In the last, 3 patches ago, on August 11th, when we put out the last major revision, that was adjusted to name that face coverings are preferred to face shields. Based on the science, OHA wanted that change to be made. And I know we talked about this in the prior office hour call, and I got a lot of feedback from folks because nurses are working really hard with their staffs to try to help often get folks to use face coverings and not face shields. And I said what's true, which is that practically in its application, the way the guidance reads, face shields aren't allowable use and would meet the face covering requirement. The aim we want to be at is to teach the science that one is actually preferred at this point, but understand that not everyone will tolerate a face covering, and if they prefer a face shield, as of now, that still remains true, that anyone could use a face shield instead. There's a lot of talk nationally, if folks follow the research, about those findings, and there's a kind of mix of studies that go back and forth, some that determine they really are equivalent and others that say they're not protective at all. We work with OHA to kind of vet all that and always ask them if they have any updates, and they have not made any updates to that guidance. So it still kind of stands is that face covering for sure, for face shields can be preferable in a few situations, specifically where teachers are teaching phonology or where being able to see face expressions really matters. And kind of functionally either could be used, but preference for face coverings.
It's really helpful. Just looking at the time, Shandine and Scott wanted to give people an opportunity if you have a special request that you'd like us to cover or a topic for next Monday, just a call to put it in the chat. And I've scanned the chat. I think we've fielded every question that's come forward, Shandine. There's a lot to manage here, so I can't assure perfection in that, but I'm pretty sure we've handled everyone's questions. So.
Oh, no, we didn't. You're right, Megan. We didn't get the OYA YSEP question. Thanks for throwing that in there again. Yeah. She says, I was wondering if there's any conversation regarding the current guidance for schools in correctional facilities, OYA and YSEP, and the square footage requirement. Students live within the campus dorms full time. It seems irrelevant that then when students are in the shop, we need to limit the number of kids.
Shandine, I don't know if you're aware of anything. This is the area where our colleagues, Director Colt Gill and Candace Pelt, have been in the lead. We can take that back as a question and try to track into where it lives. I know there's been a lot of engagement, but I'm not aware of clarity to what you're asking, Megan.
Hold on, I'm pulling up my notes right now because I know there was a conversation on it. Give me 1 second. Except JDAP. We're working on it. Let's just say that we're gonna track that, Megan, and come back to you. It's not the first question we have gotten on this, and so we have now 2 point people on YSEP JDAP support and the current concerns. So thanks for bringing it up. It continues to, we've got a lot of stuff kicking around in our brains in terms of categories of items. So appreciate you both bringing it up this time and then again, because we don't mean to miss it.
So thank you, Christine. She's requested for next time for us to talk about athletics. So we absolutely can, and thanks for adding more. And any additional questions that you want to talk about next time, let us know. The good news is there's so much beautiful learning and discovery between now and next Monday that you are sure to bring lots of new questions to the table. So just a reflection of the complex work that you're all leading, and just real gratitude and acknowledgement from us at ODE, and appreciation for just your continued commitment and working with such open heart to serve students and families in whatever capacity that looks like for you and your community at this moment in time, and kind of your continual patience and grace and willingness to open yourselves to a new idea or a new way of doing things. It's just really incredible, and we recognize that it's not easy, and it requires lots of digging down deep, and just appreciate your commitment to everything that you bring to the work and to your students most especially.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Appreciation for Alex. Thank you, Alexa and Dan, for joining. Thanks, Scott, for being here on the phone. And big thank you to Shandine as well.
Back at you,
Um,
Jennifer. Thanks, everyone.
Kim, let me see if I can't have Kate Pedersen reach out to you directly to get you the content that you missed, okay? We've got a slide deck that I can easily send you, but out of context, it's not helpful. And so I know that we recorded the first half of it. And so I will follow up with an email to put you and Kim together with the recording, and then we'll go from there. Thanks for flagging that.
All right, take care, everybody. I'm going to sign off. I've got a 4 o'clock to facilitate. Thanks so much.